Kate Falcha. Welcome to Irish Granny Helen. And I am delighted to welcome back a returning guest by popular demand, Larry Jordan, author of The Real Marilyn Monroe, the definitive book about Marilyn Monroe. We all know that. I've synopsized it. Buy the book and follow along with my videos. This is such an intriguing story. Much misinformation out there, and Larry has done a masterful job, Larry, of setting the story straight. And don't believe anything else you hear. This is the book. This is the Bible of Marilyn Monroe. Welcome, Larry. Welcome back.
Well, it's good to see you again, Aunt Helen.
Aunt?
I'm kidding.
Granny.
I don't want people to think we're related. No. Oh. I just was amazed that you discovered the book and took the time to dig through this, because it is a hefty read, 768 pages. But it is really almost the Bible of Marilyn. I mean,
I think
this covers all aspects of her life, and it's accurate.
Well, you can thank your daughter.
Yes.
And you can actually think, what's my line? Because I used to watch it as a child, and I knew who Dorothy Kilgallen was. And then I discovered Sarah's book, and the rest is history. She told me, my dad is almost finished publishing a book you might be interested in. It's about Marilyn Monroe. And I said, well, I know nothing about her. I really don't care. So I got the book, and wow, what a revelation. Because she wasn't the stereotyped person that I thought she was, that they have manipulated, What a multi-layered, intriguing story. It's got political drama. It's got psychological things. It's got things about professional ethics, international diplomacy. I mean, it's got everything. It's an epic story, really epic.
Right.
So let's get right into it, because we do have a little bit of a limited time, which in my world is not all that limited, but still. We have talked a lot about her background, her childhood, her beginnings in Hollywood, or even before that as a model, parallel to being in Hollywood, I should say. But we never got to the topic of her trip to Japan and immediate trip to Korea in 1954. And this was a pivotal experience in her life, a paradigm shift in her life. So why don't you just dig right into that part of the story?
Okay. Well, in January of 1954, Marilyn and Joe DiMaggio got married after about a 2-year courtship. And they had a brief honeymoon of a couple of weeks. And then he was pre-scheduled to go to Japan for 3 weeks for a baseball clinic. The Japanese then and now are tremendous baseball fans. They're truly fanatics, and they've got great players as well.
Yeah.
So, what was Marilyn going to do? Sit home? So she accompanied him. Joe also took his friend Lefty O'Doul, a fellow baseball player, and his wife Joan. So basically there were two couples that were going on this trip. They traveled via a very unique aircraft that was based on a B-29 bomber. It was actually called a flying hotel, and it had 2 levels, including a spiral staircase that led down to a bar. It had private rooms with a bed and so forth, impeccable service, great cuisine. It was really the airline equivalent of some of those luxury streamliner hotels. And that flight took about 9 hours with a stopover in Honolulu. And then they arrived on February 1st of 1954 in Tokyo. And there was, not surprisingly, a large group of people assembled at the airport to greet them.
Okay, I'm going to stop you right there, because you said not surprisingly. I found it puzzling that people in Japan would be, I mean, the whole story, which you're going to get into, of her having to wait, because of the crowds and everything. What I don't get it. Why would the Japanese, why would an Asian culture be so obsessed with this woman? I should say.
Well, I think they were becoming more acclimated to Japanese or to American culture. And I believe, I don't think I'm mistaken, that Eisenhower had also made a trip over there
Yeah.
as well,
I think maybe to Korea, but
yes, actually, that's what I meant. And so they were Americanized. And as I mentioned, they were big baseball fans. And where do you see the most baseball but the United States? It is surprising, however, what I'm going to tell you next, which was there were 5,000 people assembled at the airport. They were not there to see Joe DiMaggio, the baseball player.
I know. Because you would make the logical connection that they're baseball fans, they're there to see him.
Yeah.
Boy, did he not like that.
And the crowd was chanting, and I don't know Japanese, but it was Man-chan, which means sweet little girl. And Joe DiMaggio was just flummoxed. He just could not believe this. The mob was so large there that they were actually trapped aboard that big plane for about 45 minutes until U.S. Air Force guards arrived to assist the local police with crowd control.
Unbelievable.
Now, beyond that, pardon me, there were an estimated 100,000 people between the airport and the hotel that they stayed at. And just imagine this. This was like a foreign out of state. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And when she got to the hotel, she had to go out and blow kisses to the crowd from the balcony because they wouldn't settle down.
Yeah.
She had over 200 guards at the hotel.
Yeah, we just like the hotel hired them, didn't they, to protect
this
her?
Didn't do a lot for Joe's ego, I must say.
Which was massive.
But they stayed at the Imperial Hotel. That was the decor was Mayan and Art Deco. There were goldfish ponds in the lobby and so forth, and gold encrusted birds that were, decorated on the walls. And Marilyn was so impressed by the architecture, she inquired who designed this gorgeous Imperial Hotel. Turns out it was an American, Frank Lloyd Wright. And years later, when she was married to Arthur Miller, she contacted Mr. Wright and met one-on-one with him privately to talk about him drawing up a plan for a luxurious home that she and Arthur Miller anticipated building. But it was so grandiose and so overpriced, they could not afford that. However, as I report in the book, a group of Japanese investors creating a golf course in Hawaii came across this. It was presented to them years later, and they did indeed build that home and modified it for golf course use. And if you fly into Hawaii, one of the islands, you can actually see this. You can actually visit it. And in the ladies' locker room, they have a big poster, big picture of Marilyn Monroe.
Marilyn Monroe. Talk about full circle, huh?
Yeah, but it's interesting to me that Marilyn, it made, she was so into all sorts of things, and not just acting. She had broad interests, intellectual interests, literary and cultural and artistic. And so it made such an impression, she made note of who that architect was who designed this hotel they were staying in.
Well, I'm not going to interrupt your narrative flow, the chronology, but at a point later on in our conversation, I really want to talk a little bit about her wide circle of literary and intellectual friends. But let's get back to Japan.
Well, there was a bit of time, they arrived on February 1st, and so they had a couple of weeks in Japan. And she did get to go to tea with some Japanese ladies, and she's pictured seated, wearing a kimono on the whole thing, geisha girls, she and Joan, her traveling companion. She also visited hospitals, including a military hospital, and one famous picture depicts her talking with a gentleman who was the victim of an injury that he injured his back. He had a broken back. So he was laying on the bed on his stomach. And the only way that he could see Marilyn was if she got down on the floor and looked up at him. And there's a picture of them having a eye-to-eye chat. She wasn't too proud or too dignified to do that, getting down on the floor and looking up at that poor gentleman who was just suspended there in that bed. And his head was kind of hanging over the edge of the bed. And so she could make contact with him. So that's how empathetic she was. she really made a great impression. Always wanted to see more of the countryside. Um, Emperor Hirohito gave her a beautiful string of pearls. And
Tragic where they ended up. We'll
yeah,
get to
I
that.
was just going to say, you remember from my book that she ended up giving them to Paula Strasberg, the acting coach, because Paula kept dropping hints that she admired them.
The acting coach and insatiable black hole of objects and money.
Basically it.
So
the story had been told that on that flight over to Japan, that Marilyn had been approached by a high-ranking military officer asking her if she would be willing to go to Korea. And that story is a little bit fuzzy because actually there were plans dating back at least 6 months that Marilyn would at some point make a trip to Japan. In fact, it was mentioned in various columns by newspaper reporters. And she even got a letter from Cary Grant. He and his wife, Betsy, had gone to Japan. And of course, he had appeared in an earlier movie with her. And he said, all people kept asking me about is, do you know Marilyn, and what is Marilyn Monroe really like, you know? So he was encouraging Marilyn, if at all possible, to make a trip to Japan. And he said that his trip there with his wife was so rewarding, and seeing the appreciation of the soldiers, that he knew that they would just love to see Marilyn. So that was always in the back of her mind. Yet after she arrived in Japan and the press asked her, are you going to Korea? She still hedged her bets. She didn't announce the trip. And it leads me to believe that she had some opposition from
yeah, you read my mind.
And she finally put her foot down and decided to go anyway. So she was outfitted, she and her traveling companion Joan were outfitted with parkas and army boots and so forth. I can tell you that Marilyn still looked glamorous in that attire.
Yeah, it's really depressing.
And they actually rehearsed the show with an army band in Japan before they left for Korea. And I have basically a day-by-day account of that trip. She ultimately performed for over 100,000 Army and other Marine service recruits over a several-day period. That's staggering that she did. But I tell the story from the perspective of the piano player who kept copious notes.
Are you looking at my notes?
I beg your pardon?
Are you looking at my notes?
Oh,
because you're hitting every.
Hey, I can sit back and let you ask questions. I'll just reply. It's all right. It's easier that way. I have to remember.
No, this is great. This is great.
But this guy was, I think he was 23 years old.
Yeah.
And the day they began rehearsals, it began with just him and her in an auditorium of a hospital in Japan, in Tokyo. And he said his heart was pounding so hard and fast in his chest, you could have heard it across the room.
Oh, can you imagine? I mean,
I know.
Yeah.
And it happened to be Valentine's Day, which made it even more significant for this guy, who turned 3 shades of red, you know, when blushing when she showed up. But she quickly disarmed him with her down-to-earth attitude, and they began running through the numbers, the musical numbers. And he was just astonished by her vocal abilities. But then she had voice lessons and continued to take voice lessons throughout the duration of her career. Even Irving Berlin praised her singing. So this was the guy. He said that this gentleman, the piano player, said that every song that she did, she interpreted differently. She didn't just use the same voice and tone.
No, she became a different person.
Right. And she interpreted the lyrics of the song much like she would a movie script. And he was so impressed by that. And when she would make a mistake, she'd apologize. When he made a mistake on the keyboard, she would apologize. And he'd say, no, Marilyn, it's not your fault. It's my fault. Okay. So in the afternoon, then the band came in and they all rehearsed together. And then they put on a show that night, their first show, in this hospital auditorium. You may remember there was a little bit of a problem about 5 minutes before.
Oh, right.
on the stage. She announced to Gus backstage that she needed to use the ladies' room. And the problem was the ladies' room was at the back of the auditorium. And to access it, she would have had to exit the stage, go down the stairs, walk through the length of the auditorium. Naturally, the audience is going to, notice that.
They mob her,
So
yeah.
how would she get from point A to point B? So he scratched his head and he looked out the window, and just by happenstance, there was some debris or something in an alley behind this auditorium, and he spotted a ladder. So he shimmied on out the window, a back window, backstage, got to the ground safely. It was only one story up, which was still possible to break your ankle or whatever.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But he positioned the step ladder. It was actually a ladder, not a step ladder, against the building. Went back in and told Marilyn they were going to have to make their exit that way. He said, "Don't worry, I'll be right behind you." And she was game. She very carefully, in her high heels or whatever, I think it was high heels, she trudged down the back, backwards down that stairs, and he was behind her to catch her. And she ran around to the front of the building, was able to access the ladies' room, complete her task there, then come back.
Oh, you're so polite.
Climb up the ladder and not be out of breath and be able to hit her cue and perform for the audience. So that's the inauspicious beginning of this tour.
Well, I was struck by how the piano player, the band, the crew, the production people, military, how they were struck by her kindness, her generosity, her thoughtfulness, her lack of a star ego.
Yeah.
She treated people the same no matter who they were. And the fact that you have to even mention that is a sad thing, but it was rare. Yeah.
Well, as a matter of fact, she refused to accept any special treatment or accommodations. For example, it was brutally cold. She did not go to Japan thinking she'd necessarily end up in Korea in brutal cold weather in the winter. So she didn't pack accordingly. But they knew that the accommodations for the two women were very cold, and they offered her a space heater to help. She refused it. She also went through the mess line like all the other soldiers. She and Joan also did serve them. There's some pictures of them serving the troops. And she ate what they ate. There were Korean children who were picking up the scraps that had been discarded that broke her heart. But she didn't want any special treatment. And when she was invited to participate in special functions with the higher echelon of the military, such as at an officers' club, she insisted the band come along.
Yeah, she wouldn't leave people out because they were not the right echelon of the hierarchy. I'm just going to throw out a little information that I read somewhere. I'm fascinated by North Korea, and they have a very bad problem with homeless children, orphans. It's horrendous. I think they call them little swallows. If I might be wrong, but they call them little swallows, and they just live off the scraps they can find on the ground around market.
Really.
Pardon?
Contemptible, even to this day, that's going on.
Well, I just have to say this. I know this is not the subject at hand, but I live in a small town. I can go 4 blocks down and see children living in tents on the sidewalk. So I rest my case. Okay, let's
well, so they finally got going on this trip. By the way, when Marilyn and her companion had to take shots, inoculations, and I've known people that have done that. Typically, it makes them very sick.
Oh, it makes you really sick, yeah.
Flu-like symptoms and headache and all that. She seemed to fare okay.
And it's not just any kind of shots. I mean, you're getting smallpox.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, really.
And but there was also an Army nurse that accompanied them to kind of, made sure that they were all right.
Yeah.
But Gus remarked that when they were at the airport ready to depart, he met Joe DiMaggio, who was, I know this shocks you, he was cold as ice. He was glum and gloomy, and he wasn't real friendly to anybody. But anyway. So
he didn't like not being center of attention. That's the common theme running through the whole story of their relationship.
But they had a caravan of 10 military helicopters to transport Marilyn, the band members. They couldn't all fit in one helicopter.
Right.
And even the piano that they took along. And they were weaving in and out in between the mountainous terrain.
Yeah.
and there was some risk to that. I mean, the pilots were all experienced military uh, men, and they had been in combat situations under fire. So believe me, they were the top pilots that one would want. So they navigated, but there was still a risk.
Yeah, which is not something she needed to do for
No,
her image or her. I mean, it was not based on that. There was
right.
real
Compassion.
philanthropy, humanitarianism
Yeah.
in her. Yeah.
Well, at one point, they arrived somewhere where there was such a mass of humanity, all these thousands of men that she saw from the helicopter, that she asked the pilot to fly lower and circle over the entire crowd. And at her request, they opened this big side door on the helicopter. She got laid down on her stomach, had two guys that were on the helicopter, one hold each, one leg and one hold the other leg so she wouldn't fall. And she stretched out enough of her torso out of the helicopter while it was aloft and waved at the service members below.
You give me full body chills. I can't even think about that. Oh
Well,
my God.
we already have established she did not have a fear of heights, but she had a fear of smothering. But heights did not seem to bother this woman. So there are some wonderful pictures of her arriving and climbing out of the helicopter and all these things. And she also, of course, is pictured, and she was going through very difficult terrain, muddy fields. She was riding around in Army Jeeps. In fact, there's a picture of her sitting between two soldiers. And that one particular picture was her all-time favorite sentimental photograph. And Marilyn carried it with her always, even in later life, and transferred it from one purse to another. There's a great picture. Look at that.
That's a beautiful picture.
It occurred to me the other day that, she looked glamorous in all these photos. And she must have been doing her own makeup. She did not have a makeup artist along her hairstyle.
And
So,
look at the crowd here.
yes, look at that.
Good Lord. And you made an interest, and there's the kid playing the piano.
Yes, there's Gus.
You mentioned something I thought was really interesting. You said, it was absolutely freezing, dead winter in Korea. Mm-hmm. You saw the dress she was wearing. She was frozen, but she didn't want to deprive them. Oh, very good. Yeah.
I printed out, this is not a real good rendition. I printed it out on my home computer. But that may be my favorite all-time Marilyn picture. Look at the joy on her face.
And she didn't want to hide her assets,
Really,
she knew why she was there.
And it was actually more of a purplish blue sequin dress. She's wearing the shoes.
Heels.
There's pictures of her talking to the soldiers after the show. One of them is tapping her toe. He just wanted to touch her. So she let him tap. I'm going to try this again. Touch her big toe.
Yeah, I think
you can see the glee on the faces of these guys. And but anyway, the thing that's significant about this that we need to point out, Helen, is
there's another.
Yes, that's one of the pictures. It was so freezing cold. Now keep in mind, these guys were bundled up with parkas.
You could see their fur hats on.
And she was there wearing a cocktail dress in freezing temperatures because she knew the soldiers wanted to see her. And one time, and she related this later, it started to snow and sleet while she was on stage. So just imagine that. But she was,
after this trip, she got pneumonia, didn't she? She got the flu anyway.
She did.
Was really
I don't think it was pneumonia, but she got an upper respiratory thing.
Yeah.
On the way home, but she was willing to brave that. But she said in response to the reaction of the service members, some of whom, by the way, had walked for hours to get to the location of one of these outdoor stages. Some of them even climbed telephone poles.
You were hanging off the lamp poles for 5 hours.
But she said this was the first time she felt like a star.
Yeah.
Isn't that something? And amazingly, for someone who was so shy, because she was an introvert in an extrovert profession, she wasn't afraid at all. She commented about it several times later. And just seeing all those men and the appreciation and the love that was outpouring from them put her at total ease. So she didn't have stage fright or nervousness or anything. And the reviews attest to that in the Stars and Stripes and other publications that covered it. And even some of the letters, I quote from some of them, written by like an Iowa soldier that met her. They remarked that there were so many, they ran out of film at the PXs. And at night, on one occasion, there were so many flash bulbs going off. You know, in those days, they had those really
Cubes.
bulbs.
Yeah.
There were so many going off of guys taking her picture on stage that it lit up the sky. And they kind of mused that the North Koreans were probably wondering what kind of military exercise is going on. You know, the sky is all lit up here. What's going on?
Yeah.
So it was quite an incredible thing. There were actually Dutch and Thai troops in addition to Americans that were part of one.
I thought those soldiers didn't. They looked ethnic, and you know, it's in the United States, of course, that's entirely possible. I think they were Thai. Yeah, that's interesting.
There was one occasion when they had gotten her a big cake, and she was asked to cut the cake, and she accidentally cut herself. A big butcher knife. It wasn't a serious wound, but they had to treat her. And some general ordered, this is not to go in the Stars and Stripes. You're not to report this. They didn't want to make it seem even dangerous for Marilyn to be in Korea, you know, much less the troops.
Please.
But on one occasion, also, they had forgotten to remove one of the pinup calendars, the infamous pinup calendar, and they were embarrassed greatly.
The one where she's naked?
Yes.
Okay.
She walked into a room, and there was that calendar, and they thought, oh, my God, you know.
Well, she's
and
seen it before.
She noticed their embarrassment and laughed about it, said, that's okay, gentlemen, you know, I'm proud of that calendar. So she just put everybody at ease, and she was so sweet. There's so much testimony to this.
I know.
She was down to earth, so sweet, and it was the highlight, I'm sure, of her life. She felt like a star. And, you know, I wondered, I speculate on this in the book, I wonder if seeing all these guys out there also made her think of her first husband, who was in the military, James Doherty,
right,
and what his life was like. And when people complimented her, when the troops complimented her on enduring various hardships, and she said, I just feel sorry for all the men and women that are having to do that here month after month. I can certainly put up with it for a few days. And I'm glad she was glad to be doing that.
You need to compare that to Elizabeth Taylor's birthday.
Oh, yes.
That's extraordinary. So she went back home. It was a huge, gigantic success. And she got back home and she was quite ill, right?
Yeah, she was ill on the way home, and she was nursed back to health at the relatives of Joe DiMaggio's family, which was okay. But then, you know, we've already covered some of the things that went on after that.
Well, that No Business Like Show Business, some of the songs were remarkable.
Right.
And I think the thing that struck me, if I'm remembering correctly, was this where she was helping crew members who had sick family and
she was doing that electrician.
Yeah, quietly.
Had a wife that was desperately sick in the hospital.
Yeah.
And she handed him a big roll of bills. But the other thing I was going to say is that the PR value of that trip, and Marilyn didn't do that for PR value. I just know that from studying this woman. She didn't go there to flaunt the fact that she was a humanitarian. She went there because she felt touched by what their sacrifice was. She wasn't a communist, as Lois Banner tries to make her out to be. But she,
Wait a minute. Why was she accused of being a communist? I don't remember.
Well,
that.
because remind me of this, and I'll bring this up a little later. She had written a letter to Lester Markle, who was an editor friend at the New York Times, and she was defending Castro a little bit in '59. But I point out you have to consider the context, because Ed Sullivan, who had 50 million viewers to his Sunday night variety show, had Castro. And some of his colleagues
introduced him as a nice young man.
Nice young man. They were not godless. They were carrying Bibles. They were going to church. Castro was honored like a hero when he went to New York. He was mobbed.
Didn't they give him a ticker tape parade? Am I imagining?
He made a speech also, I think it was Princeton. He was treated like a hero.
Yeah.
But so Marilyn's letter that Lois Banner cites was written during that time frame when
That
even Ed
context.
Sullivan was singing his praises.
Yeah.
But then things changed. It's
Nobody's
unfair.
calling Ed Sullivan a communist.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was very unfair. You know, this is why I always stress when you and I chat that I felt that the thing that is number one lacking aside from truth and all these other myriad books that have been put out over the years is that they have not established the context of her life. They're not telling whatever else is going on. I don't
Well,
mean to
that's
be being,
celebrity gossip.
well,
You
I
don't
don't mean
want
to be denigrating Lois Banner. There are some things that she reported that I completely agree with. But in this instance, to portray her as a communist was absurd because she definitely was not that. I think she proved that by going to the, to Korea, which, by the way, was still a war zone, although there was a cessation of active military, fighting. It was
exchange. Yeah.
still a very tenuous place to be.
Well,
It was in
just
danger.
as an aside, a comment on celebrity gossip, which is pretty much propaganda. I had my eyes open reading your daughter's book about that included Luella Parsons.
Oh, yeah.
I know who she was, but who pays attention to that old stuff, right? It's pretty shocking, and we won't take our time here. I'm going to cover that later.
Mhm.
Doing her book right now, but yeah, I think you have to be really careful and take anything you hear, and especially today with a block of salt. When they're talking about famous people, it's whatever suits the agenda of the person saying the stuff.
If anything, it's gotten a lot worse in present
Oh
time.
yeah.
It really has. Maybe we
So
should go ahead.
no, I was just gonna bring up the topic of her not getting some really iconic parts. She did No Business Like Show Business, and I know you gave me a list of movies you really want to talk about. In the build up to that, she turned down or wasn't given Guys and Dolls. Vivian Blaine got that role. Great movie. Pillow Talk, Doris Day got that, with Rock Hudson.
Mm-hmm.
Irma La Deuce, I thought that was interesting. Shirley MacLaine, who I always thought was miscast in that. So, so okay. And then she did Bus Stop. We did talk about Bus Stop, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. And we talked about we weren't fond of Don Murray.
I didn't like the movie Bus Stop.
No,
And
I know.
it's interesting to see that she didn't like the final edition of it either.
No, but she appreciated the value of it as a business property, and she owned that. It was produced by Marilyn Monroe Productions. I was going to comment when you were reciting some of the films she did not make, and there's even a longer list. Maybe you have some others that you want to mention.
No, those are the ones that jumped out at me.
Yeah. Keep in mind that she was kind of at odds with 20th Century Fox.
Oh, that's a nice
time, and they were punishing her.
Yeah.
And what was awkward for them was that she really gained a lot of enhanced stature with the public by virtue of the coverage of her Korean trip. So it put 20th Century and Daryl Zanuck in a tizzy because, she was garnering all this publicity. So they thought, well, we're still going to stick it to her. We're still going to make her under contract. She has to do these things. But she refused. And of course, it ultimately led to her abandoning Hollywood and thumbing her nose at the studio that refused to give her scripts or allow her to play scripts such as the ones that you've been mentioning, and just wanted to almost punish her and bring her in line, because this was in the era when the Hollywood studios were at their maximum in terms of controlling not just the female stars, but the male stars.
Oh, they were dictators. It was terrible.
They decided who you married or didn't marry, and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
And they invented an image for you that was or was not accurate. So they really controlled every aspect of your life.
And for a woman, especially, to defy that, nobody defied them. And then for a woman who everybody thought, dumb blonde, she stood up to them and was successful standing up to them. That must have been such a massive ego blow to all those, guys. Yeah. But I just have to say it again. I didn't like Busta.
Yeah, I
I've
wasn't
been
real
trying
fond
to
of it
watch
either.
her movies, so
Yeah,
to talk with you about it.
yeah.
It's hard to find them without paying, and I don't do that. So the next one that you wanted to talk about was The Prince and the Showgirl.
Well, I thought we kind of exhausted that to the extent that Laurence Olivier was a real pill. Boy, I
Hmm.
really had a
It
sense
was a nickname for Richard.
of he was a problem from the word go. I
Yeah.
think everybody acceded to his his overblown reputation.
Yeah.
He was the director, and he didn't know how to direct a movie, and that was painfully obvious in him choosing inferior takes. I mentioned this earlier. He wanted Marilyn to be, try to be sexy. He said to her, he wouldn't
So
let her
rude,
wear one of the
intentionally
dresses.
and belittling. Yeah.
He was really, a sad guy. The one thing that was a pivotal thing in her movie career and what brought her back to Hollywood was the blow up with Milton Greene. Now, we've talked about Milton Greene
Oh, yeah.
being a business partner. When Marilyn fled Hollywood, it was really kind of at the suggestion of Milton Greene, who was a photographer who met her much earlier than her, than Milton's son Joshua thinks, or maybe even that Amy thinks. And I have the proof of that because of correspondence that was exchanged a few years earlier between Marilyn and
Well,
Milton
didn't he
Greene.
photograph her modeling?
He
Several.
photographed her, I think it was in like 1948, and
Yeah.
she had
Yeah.
stayed with him as a house guest, and wrote him to thank him, and wrote it in verse, with rhyme.
Mhm.
And it was just a casual acquaintance between a photographer and a model. And it was clear that she had stayed at his Connecticut farm. And so she got to know this guy well before she ever really became a business partner. He was divorced at the time, by the way, when she saw him. And she was also single at the time she met him. So we can
So
clearly agree
everybody
on
just calm down.
that. Everybody calm down.
Yeah.
But then he married I think it was a Cuban model, Amy
Oh,
Green,
I
who was
didn't
very attractive.
realize that. She was Cuban,
Yes.
huh?
And she had some savoir faire of her own. But
Hmm.
anyway, Marilyn ran into Milton again, and he said she was just fed up with what Hollywood was giving her for
Oh,
screen.
yeah.
He said, "Why don't you come out to the East Coast?" She already knew of the Actors Studio at that time. He
Right.
said, "You can stay at my farm with my wife, Amy, and our son, Joshua, who was very young at the time."
Baby, yeah.
So she did. And this is a whole new life. She even got a Connecticut driver's license. There were certain tax advantages to living in Connecticut, and yet it was close enough she could get to New York. And Milton got one of her friends, the dress manufacturer, Henry
Oh, right, right. What was his
you
name? I
know,
think it started with
Henry
an H.
Rosenfeld, I believe, to kind of foot the bill for an apartment for her for a while. She stayed at the Waldorf, which, by the way, as an aside, I don't know if you saw this, the Waldorf has been closed for 8 years and now has undergone a major transformational restoration. It's now reopened in New York. So the next time
I
you get to
read
New
that. I
York,
didn't pay attention to it, but I
right.
did see it.
But
Yeah.
anyway, she actually stayed for a while in a apartment at the Waldorf. But most of the time was spent in Connecticut, and she loved it. She also had appeared on the Jack Benny program, and
Right.
in lieu of payment, because the contract with 20th Century Fox
Fox, yeah.
would not allow her to receive money from anybody else,
Right.
Jack bought her a brand new Cadillac,
Cadillac.
black Cadillac.
Yeah.
I think it had a red interior, convertible. And so, she tooled around town with that. So Milton, it was important for Milton when they formed Marilyn Monroe Productions that she continued to project the persona of a star. The truth of the matter was that he was borrowing against his home to be able to foot the bill on some of these things because
Yeah.
there wasn't any money. Well, there was some money, but not enough to keep her in this lifestyle. But ultimately, when it became possible for her to go back to Hollywood because she had become such a big star, they lured her back with the promise of director approval, script approval, cinematographer approval, And
Like
around
4 movies, I think they
right.
said
And
guaranteed.
I
Yeah.
kind of went off on a tangent there. I wanted to return to the fact that Arthur Miller, by that time, was in her life, was her husband, and Arthur was jealous with Milton. And he would harass Milton and blow up at him on the phone. And Milton would say, "If you're going to keep talking to me that way, I'm going to hang up." And he'd do it. But I ran across, there was a lot of material of Marilyn's that was sold off, auctioned off in recent years.
Yeah.
Very helpful for a biographer who wants inside info.
Did you go to the auctions?
No, I didn't have to. They posted all this stuff on the
It's
web.
online.
And
I'm
at that
old.
point,
I
it's
didn't
public
agree.
domain, my dear.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to pay the $42,000 to buy a letter I could read for free. And by this time, it's all inculcated into the mainstream of American life. So it'd be hard pressed for anybody to say, "Oh, I own that copyright." Sorry, you've let the cat out of the bag on that one.
Yeah. Yeah. How many
But
books
anyway,
is it
I
already in?
read letters that Arthur had written to Marilyn, stirring her up,
Oh, he
trying
was
to make her antagonistic toward me.
awful.
And he finally convinced her to use his lawyers to end the business relationship with Milton Greene.
Yeah.
And even when they were in this lawyer's meeting room, sitting across the table, Milton only wanted the money back that he originally invested. He didn't want any damages. He didn't want any more money. And Marilyn was whispering to him, "Take more, take more."
Yeah.
She was trying to get him to take more, and he refused. And he said in front of everybody, "Marilyn, I want to be the one person in your life who doesn't take advantage of you."
Can I ask you something while
Yeah.
I'm thinking of it? So, is this around the time where Miller is manipulating her life, and she ends up with a new psychiatrist who is putting her on anxiety medication or something? And there's allegedly rumor that Milton got his hands on those drugs and went right off the rails and eventually died.
Well, when they were filming The Prince and the Showgirl, of course, Milton was over there. Let's give him credit. He got Bus Stop and Prince of the Showgirl wrapped up in time, not over budget. He had some skills in addition to his magnificent talent as a photographer. I think he took some of the greatest pictures to exist. But when they were overseas filming The Prince and the Showgirl over in England, Milton was having doctors send prescription drugs, sleeping pills, uppers and downers,
Yeah.
to him, supposedly for Marilyn. But Milton was also partaking of them, and some of those probably were consumed solely by Milton Greene.
Now, wasn't it, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but just to make sure that I'm remembering the right thing, wasn't she needing sleep regulation with medication because Miller kept changing the script? Is this the movie where he'd show up late at night with a new script with lines for her to know in the next morning?
Well, The Prince and the Showgirl was actually done by a different, don't ask me the name of that,
Glad I asked.
screenwriter. Yeah. So that wasn't it. But of course, when they went on their honeymoon, her and Miller, when they first got married, they immediately departed for England so she could make this movie. And of course, we've already, I think, mentioned that he left his diary open to a page she was sure to see, in which he'd said very unkind and upsetting remarks about his new bride. So I would say that was a marriage that got off to a bad start.
So toxic. Yeah. Terrible.
But anyway, so where are we on?
I'm sorry I interrupted you. I shouldn't have done that. So Milton had gotten
the Milton thing, yeah. He was, Milton Greene or Arthur Miller was determined to break up this successful business relationship with Milton. He scapegoated him for everything. And the conspiratorial language this man used, I think I have some of it. I'm pretty sure I do in my book. You should read that again. I mean, it was just so offensive. And poor Marilyn, she was between a rock and a hard place, but she assented to this. And she regretted it later. And not that long afterwards, she accused Arthur in front of other people, film crew. "You took away everybody that ever mattered to me, especially Milton Greene," because she realized she made a mistake, and Milton realized it.
Yeah,
and
they had been so close. Yeah.
Amy Greene even said that, this was a mistake for the two of them ever to have broken up. By the way, I just realized one thing we forgot to talk about. was Marilyn's appearance on the program Person to Person with Edward R. Murrow.
Oh, I do actually have that written down. Maybe I skipped over it.
Are
I
we
just
doing
wanted
okay
to
on
point.
time with regard to your time?
Yeah, we're good. We're good.
Okay.
Hold on. I loved how she called Olivier Mr. Sir. I think I have that event with Edward R. Murrow. I just have a sentence for it. I wrote it a little bit later, I think. But yeah, we can mention that. I mean, he treated her like an infant.
Well, it took place when Marilyn was staying with
Amy.
the Milton Greene family, Amy and so forth. So it was actually done at their farmhouse, and CBS had to erect a very, very, very tall transmission tower to get the signal from that farm back to the CBS headquarters in New York. So it's quite an engineering feat. They had to bring out all the lights and place cameras. That program, Person to Person, was really in the vanguard of television technology, because Edward R. Murrow would sit there in that easy chair, chain smoking his cigarettes that he eventually died from. And behind him, before the days of Chiron or any of the new techniques we have, you would see this enormous picture, and it was a live shot from whatever the celebrity was, their home or whatever, that he was interviewing that week. It was quite revolutionary. But they had rehearsed this interview a little bit in advance, and just before airtime, the producer on the scene said, just relax. I forget the figure he used, but just act like there aren't 25 million viewers watching this. Whereupon Marilyn and Milton had a meltdown and froze, stage fright with, 60 seconds to countdown to air, But I don't think the public realized that initially. They began with Milton giving kind of a little tour of his studio, his photo studio in his home. It's quite a nice rural home, large, stone fireplace, the whole thing. But then they entered the living room, and there sat Marilyn with Amy Greene. And Marilyn did not acquit herself very well. She was very shy, very soft-spoken, very plainly attired. She really kind of bungled questions when they were posed about Marilyn Monroe Productions. She was very succinct, and Amy saw her chance to kind of take over and dominate. I think that was deliberate. I'm sorry to say that. I think she was trying to outshine Marilyn, and she succeeded. There were unkind remarks, telegrams even, sent to Marilyn the next day, including from somebody that wanted to work with Amy, hire Amy instead of Marilyn.
Didn't she go on to have a career, Amy?
Well,
a minor.
Amy had a career, but she was certainly not going to enter the picture as a motion picture star at that point. But Edward R. Murrow was so ridiculous in his questioning of Amy, even asking, does Marilyn make her own bed? And you know what? If I had been Amy Greene, I would have said, yes, Ed, and she's potty trained too.
Yeah, because that wasn't her agenda, right? She had another agenda going on.
Insulting. And after the show, a few days afterwards, as I reveal in my book, The Real Marilyn Monroe.
Okay, let me.
There you go. Edward R. Murrow sent Marilyn a vinyl album consisting of speeches of Winston Churchill and a cover letter. And I've often wondered if he did that to insult her intellectual gifts, or whether he genuinely thought it would be a gift that she would enjoy. But Ed Murrow didn't do Marilyn any favors. It was even embarrassment. Zanuck had tried to prevent that interview just for contractual reasons, but he was cruelly laughing about it because he thought Marilyn had done such a thing.
Backfired, yeah.
When you stop and think about the totality of what I present in the book, the number of times that Marilyn, this innocent young woman, was insulted cruelly by people, members of the press, other people. Here she was, a worldwide star.
Yeah.
And she had the purest of hearts. And yet people would dig her. And you know why that was? Jealousy.
Jealousy, yeah.
Pure
Well,
and simple jealousy. We all know that.
Constantly having to prove she wasn't dumb,
Yeah.
and she really resisted the dumb blonde roles, and you
Yeah.
can understand why. She was so typecast.
Well, and that's why it's a little bit unusual that she agreed to return to Hollywood and make Some Like It Hot. But she had read the screenplay. Paula Strasberg was in that, by the way. And Paula Strasberg got $50,000 for helping on that one, the equivalent of $500,000 today.
Wow.
But
Wow.
yeah, wow. But the thing was that it was such a good script. Billy Wilder co-wrote that script, and it was a hilarious film.
One of my favorite movies. It's
Yeah,
just, you
it
can
is.
watch it over and over. It's
We
so
probably
good.
need to tell a little bit about the plot if you want to tell the plot, or I could.
Oh God, now I have to remember it. Okay, so there's a couple of guys playing in a band in a speakeasy, right? That's Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis, right? And there's a police raid. And am I getting that right? And they
Well,
have
they witnessed a gangland shooting.
Oh, okay.
Machine guns and the whole thing.
Yeah, they're trying to flee.
But they realized they were spotted, and they barely eluded the Chicago crime family.
Mob. Yeah, you tell it.
And they made it to the train station and hid aboard this train.
Yeah.
Whereupon that was destined for Florida.
Yeah.
Whereupon they encountered this all-girls
band.
And one of them was Marilyn Monroe.
Dude, I'm just laughing at the mention of it because it's just so funny. And
so they realized that they had to do something to still camouflage themselves, because some of the crooks were on the train.
On the train, of course.
So they came up with the idea of dressing up as women. Now, consider the times. This was 1959, and this is very controversial.
Yep.
To have two Hollywood male stars dressed in drag.
Yeah.
Come to think of it, Helen, I think it would be controversial today, and those people would probably be deported now, wouldn't they? To some third country.
You do not want to get me started.
I know. But I mean, you can see the times.
Well, here's a little tidbit. They're and you know this, you put it in the book. They're in drag and they're in makeup, and they discovered really quickly early in the filmmaking that colored film didn't do them justice with this makeup on their, their beard face. And so that's why the movie's in black and white, because it worked visually. They looked more convincing, I guess, in black and white.
Yes, indeed. And Marilyn went along with that. She was actually shown some test strips of film, and it just looked garish. The color on the men's faces. I
don't know. It looked like maybe they were going to Florida because they lived at a certain Marjorie Post mansion.
Well, actually, they look green, not orange. So you've mistaken that.
Yeah, they didn't look orange.
No, they didn't look orange. But anyway, she went along with it. It's kind of a period flick. Anyway, it's so well done. You don't even stop and notice that it's black and white.
No. And I thought it was very interesting because I recently completed a huge, several months long coverage of a book on Roscoe Arbuckle. Mm-hmm. And he got his start, his Hollywood start in the Keystone Cops. Mm-hmm. And the book your book mentions that this was sometimes compared a bit to the slapstick of the Keystone Cops.
Yes.
I saw it when you said it. It didn't occur to me, but you can see that. Yeah.
Real quick, I know we're running short on time, but
no, we're not. We're good. We have an hour.
Oh my gosh. I thought, you and I have still not synchronized our time schedules here. I thought I
we
was going to have to wrap this up in 3 minutes.
And we've got 53 minutes on the clock.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah.
What I was going to say is that if people saw the film, they may remember the first time that Marilyn is seen in the film. It's not right away, because first that drama has to unfold, the gangland slaying and all that. Do you remember the first time that she's seen on the film?
Walking to the train, at the train station?
Walking past the train station.
Yeah.
Or, past the train. It was steam engines. And she came up with the idea of having the steam blow out, which it would do of a locomotive. At certain intervals, they'd release steam. Right after she walked by, and she kind of lunges forward to escape the steam.
Yeah, because
She
she's
came up
just
with that.
so hot.
She came up with that movie metaphor, or whatever you want to call it, that device. And so it wasn't just, okay, we open and she's walking down the, no.
No,
Our
she was an
attention's
artist.
immediately attracted because, ooh, there's that blust of steam,
Yeah.
from
And the subconscious
yes.
reference to her being hot. She had a creative eye, such a talent, and it was subtle a lot of the times. You don't even realize. Just very quickly, I don't like the movie, but I do give her respect for the fact that when she made Bus Stop and she's playing this poverty-stricken young woman who's making her money, it's difficult. And she thought to herself, what would a life like that really be? Sleeping by day, working by night. So she had special makeup made to make her look wan and not in the sun.
She and Whitey Snyder came up with that.
But see, those are the subtle artistic touches. Of course, eventually we need to talk about her and her relationship to the stage. But let's keep going with Some Like It Hot. Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, Lloyd Shearer is a name that many people, maybe my age or older, know. He was a writer for Parade magazine. Now, I don't personally know. I haven't read a newspaper in years, except online, not a print edition anyway. They've shrunk to the size of a toilet paper width.
Papers or the print?
The paper itself has gotten so narrow, it's so thin, the type is so small, they have abandoned the reportage standards of newspapers that I don't bother with them, frankly. There are a few, like Washington Post or New York Times that I do read, Wall Street Journal. But anyway, so I can't answer whether or not Parade magazine even exists. I've not.
Well, it did a couple of years ago because I had a neighbor who got the New York Times and would give the copy to me when she was done with it. It's not in my local big city paper, and I won't say where that is. But when it finally, the last time I saw it, it was much smaller, like you said, shrunken and thinner, and a large portion of it was exclusive luxury real estate ads.
Well, Parade used to be a fun read. They had personality parade, like on the inside of the front cover, Q&A on people, but they also did feature stories. And Lloyd Shearer was a star reporter for them. Parade was a Sunday supplement that was printed centrally and then shipped to newspapers around the country. They worked ahead of time a bit so that your local newspaper on Sunday could insert it with their own local edition of the paper.
Yeah,
it was in the middle of the paper. And I used to enjoy reading it, but now that I know about Lloyd Shearer and how he mistreated Marilyn, I no longer like him or like his cousin. But he went to visit her while they were filming at the Coronado Hotel in, I think it was San Diego.
That's where they filmed a lot of the Some Like It Hot. That's that beautiful resort.
It's interesting. The architecture is just so Floridian. You'd think it was Florida, which is where the story took place, but it really wasn't. And there was a crowd assembled behind police lines to watch this. And Lloyd really pulled out all the stops to demean Marilyn. It was unbelievable. I actually wrote some of this down. He said she looked like a frightened gazelle. She lacked poise or stage presence. He quoted a spectator as saying, and she's gotten real fat.
When I read that in your book, I went back I Googled pictures of her from that whole time period. And I was absolutely perplexed. I'm looking at these pictures and I'm thinking, I wish I were that fat. I could not believe it. It's like, don't believe your eyes. You're going to believe me or your long eyes.
We'll get to this when we cover the last year of her life.
Yeah.
They were even saying that she was fat, lost her shape and all this while filming her last movie. I guess people, I know now people have seen the poolside shots. She had an incredible figure.
She was exquisite. It's disgusting.
Warren Schiller, the photographer, said, and this is a quote, she looked 1,000 times better in person than I thought she would, based on all these phony press reports.
Yeah, what you've heard.
It just showed
and just to insinuate this observation, and not to interrupt you. She ran every day. She ran on the beach for miles. She lifted weights, and she had the strictest diet. I don't
Oh
know
my
how
God.
anybody stuck to that diet.
Her favorites were liver, chopped liver, carrots, but she didn't eat. She talked about cholesterol, so she was not eating, ham and pork chops and roasts and fatty foods. She was very, very careful about what she ate.
I think she treated herself in the same way as she treated her singing voice and didn't she take horseback riding and fencing?
Oh yeah.
Everything, including her own physical appearance, was a skill that had to be maintained. Yeah.
And Ralph Roberts, her friend that we haven't talked too much about, he pops in and out of this story, I realize.
Yeah.
But he even said that she had acquired a book on anatomy and carried that book around. She literally wanted to know about the sinew, the muscles, the structure of the body. And she studied that.
Yeah.
And movement, we've already talked about. I had misstated. She went and consulted a mimic. Well, really, I said a pantomime. No, it was a mime she saw, not a pantomime. Pantomime is what a mime does, so I stand corrected. But she even did that for one of her roles also. So she took a very cerebral look at this whole thing, but
she really took it seriously.
Degrading article. Now, I grant you that there were a few times on the set where Marilyn had a little bit of difficulty. I tell about it in the book. She was supposed to say, "Where's the bourbon?" In one scene, and she just could not get that out of her mouth. She was supposed to go to a chest of drawers and search for the bourbon. Now, just to digress for a moment, point of clarification. Tony Curtis actually played two roles. He dressed up in drag.
Oh, that's right.
But he also, at one point, decided he had enough appreciation for Marilyn's character. He wanted to try to romance her. So he adopted this yacht
monocle.
The whole thing, impersonated Cary Grant, was out there sitting in one of those wicker chairs, beachside, pointed to a boat that was
taking credit for the yacht,
his yacht, and all that kind of stuff. But there was a scene where he and Marilyn were aboard his yacht, which he actually, as I recall, it belonged to somebody, and he kind of like intruded on it when he knew the guy wasn't there. So
he knew they were at dinner on the island, and so they just went to the boat like it was his.
Marilyn was filming the scene with Tony Curtis, and she was supposed to say, "Where's the bourbon?" and open up this drawer. But she couldn't remember the line or didn't get it right. So finally, Billy Wilder got exasperated and pasted the line, "Where's the bourbon?" in the drawer of the chest of drawers. Then she opened up the wrong drawer. So then he had it pasted in all the drawers. No matter what drawer she opened, she would know, see that line. Then what do you think Marilyn did? She went to a completely different piece of furniture. It took 30 takes to do this film, to this scene. Now, I don't know how to explain that exactly, because as has been pointed out by Roger Ebert, Marilyn and Tony Curtis also exchanged lines like a hot potato.
Well, he hated her.
And forth. And Roger, who knew the story, said, "You would never guess from seeing the final version that it wasn't a completely spontaneous and natural thing that she had said." So she could pull it off. You might have to have a little bit of patience with her. You might have to waste a little bit of film. But in the end, as Billy Wilder admitted, it was worth it.
Do you think that she did that on purpose just to annoy Tony Curtis? Because he didn't make any secret of his disdain.
I don't know. He was gossiping about an affair with her, and none existed. I'm confident of that. Even Whitey Snyder and people very, very close to Marilyn said there was antagonism between those two.
That's right.
On the set. And and Tony Curtis, judging by when he appeared on the Larry King Show, and one of the other guests was James Haspel, the young man that befriended her. They clashed because Tony was saying all kinds of things about
nasty.
Marilyn rose to stardom by sleeping, working the boulevard, which is something that other people have said, which is just really a putrid lie.
On the stroll.
Yeah. Haskell confronted him. It's a wonder he didn't smack him in the nose on that one.
Well,
But anyway,
I left my psychiatric license in the other room, but I'm going to just toss an idea out here. This is a young woman who had experienced severe, repeated, ongoing childhood trauma. We don't want to say the words, but I wonder if there was something about him that brought out that trauma. You know, she had PTSD. I mean, she had screaming nightmares and stuff. I wonder if there was something about him that just created this mental block that she couldn't cope.
I think that's a very good guess. I really do. I really think that could be it, because he remained antagonistic years, decades after she died.
Yeah.
Why did he want to go on that show? Instead of reminiscing about her, as the other guest did, he just wanted to make one crass comment after another.
He said it was like kissing Hitler.
And he said that while she was alive. And she made a note to himself, unfortunately for Tony, you know, he won't get that chance, or, you know, kissing her. So she put that in her own notes. She wasn't lying to herself. You can believe, you know, what she was saying there.
There was something that we just will never know going on between them. I'm convinced of it.
There is one thing. She was under a lot of stress during that because she was pregnant.
She was pregnant and she'd had miscarriages, and I'm sure.
Yes, and she ended up having an ectopic pregnancy.
I know.
That was terminated after the filming was done. But believe it or not, they didn't have to make any adjustments in her costume. So whoever that lackey was that said she was fat was off base totally. By the way, Eve Arnold, a very distinguished and respected photographer, said of Marilyn that she
Eve Arnold.
Eve Arnold. I'm sorry. What did I say?
You said Eve Arnold.
Oh,
Armis Brooks.
No. Not Eve Arnold. I always get that confused. I'll come to it here in a minute.
Oh, anyway, okay. I didn't mean to correct you.
Famous photographer. She also photographed Marilyn making the Misfits. Funny, I don't remember that name. The book is only 714,000 words. Why do I not remember them?
Listen, Larry, I'll confess to you, when I was getting these questions ready and refreshing my memory, I was going through my notes. I have, just so people know, this is 6 legal pads full of notes about this book.
Know.
And so I was going through them last night and the day before, trying to refresh my memory for questions. And I'd read my notes and I'd think to myself, well, I don't remember reading that or writing it, but okay. Yeah.
Even as a writer, I can go back and I can read things with new eyes. Sometimes that's good if I'm not in a hurry to actually complete something, because I will discover that I want to change this or change that. But why am I not remember that name?
It's okay.
Anyway, she said that Marilyn photographed 10 pounds lighter than she really was, and that it defied every standard of photography.
Yeah,
but you know, and Marilyn, even at her heaviest, which was I believe 135, had an hourglass figure and a very tiny waist. So anyway, but she was pregnant during that time. And she ultimately she actually collapsed in early November while she was still filming, and was treated. And then after completing was finished, she did, then when she'd returned to New York, then did lose the baby. Just before all this happened, I note in my book something kind of interesting. She decided to enroll in an art class in Connecticut.
Yeah.
And sent for art materials. So while she was still out in Hollywood making that film, she was painting. And it was a hobby that she continued the rest of her life. As a matter of fact, she had at one point, before moving to California at the end of 1961, she was considering the purchase of a townhouse. I even know which one. I put it in the book. And it was a 3-story townhouse. And she had plans, architectural drawings created for it. And it would have included an art studio for her. So that's how serious she was about art. And during a break in filming her last movie in 62, she spent the day doing a painting for her favorite president, and it was not Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln was her favorite, but this guy was a little more contemporary, but we can't.
When we eventually get to that, I have some thoughts about the weird parallels there, but we'll talk about that later. Right. Okay, so we're, why she took the dumb blonde role again. Did we mention that she hated that, and she did take it for Some Like It Hot
Well,
because
she
she saw
did
the
it.
merit in the
Well,
script?
she did it because the relationship with Milton Greene had broken up, the professional relationship. And so, this is at a point where she'd already made two movies. And her business partner, Milton Greene, was no longer on the scene thanks to Arthur Miller. So, in a way, it was almost an opportunistic thing for her to return to Hollywood. Like, what was she going to do? Continue MMP while she didn't have her business
Alone, yeah.
partner? And obviously, she didn't trust Arthur Miller to fill the shoes of Milton Greene. She was smart enough to know that would have been a disaster. So anyway.
Well, so that's pretty. She got the Golden Globe, by the way, for the role she played.
Yes, she did.
And then her next movie was Let's Make Love. And you mentioned a little while ago Ralph Roberts. And that was when they really solidified their lifelong.
Let me ask you, are we not getting that out of sequence?
Well, I took this from the book. And you know what? I took it from my notes from the book. And I think I was wondering last night, I think what you did a little bit was go back in time sometimes, move back and forth, and like I'm trying to remember what it was that you talked about that was so interesting. You led through Korea and what she was up to, but then you went back into the life of a significant person to their birth and talked all about them. So there is a little bit of out of sync chronological writing, and I just went through my notes one page after another last night. When was the movie Let's Make Love?
Well, by the way, it was Eve Arnold was the gal that
It was Eve Arnold. Not the same one, was it?
Yeah. Well, you're thinking of you're thinking of an actress, I think.
Yeah. Do you remember that show, Our Miss Brooks?
Yes.
That's how old I am.
Very funny.
I remember watching that after kindergarten.
I could stand corrected after this video gets posted. People write in and say, this writer who supposedly wrote this really accurate book, can't even remember the name.
Oh, this book is so dense. Okay, Let's Make Love was made in 1960, and Some Like It Hot was made in 1958. So
and released in 59. So that's why I was kind of concentrating on the Some Like It Hot before we would get to the whole thing about, Let's Make Love. I guess there's nothing, I will say that in early 1959, Marilyn, I did want to take note of this. She became acquainted with Carl Sandburg, who actually went to her New York apartment. She kind of befriended him during that time. She had a whole bunch of literary friends.
Oh, yeah, I did want to talk about that. It struck me as
and she, in tandem with the movie, had also gone to Chicago on St. Patrick's Day and dined at the Pump Room with novelist Saul Bellow. And he wrote something I thought was kind of interesting. I'm going to quote from here. He said, "I have yet to see anything in Marilyn that isn't genuine. She was like somebody who picked up a high voltage wire and then couldn't get rid of it. She had kind of a curious incandescence under the skin, which is rare." And I find this interesting because Ralph Roberts, when he came on the scene, Ralph had met her under the auspices of the Strasbergs. They were all friends, but he didn't pay any real attention. It was a hello and a little chit-chat. He didn't really even per se recognize her. When he finally really met her, he had given Susan Strasberg a massage one morning at the Strasberg apartment, and there was some blonde there, and he asked Susan, who's that woman? He said, "You've never met? That's Marilyn Monroe. She wasn't wearing makeup." And then they ultimately did meet, a couple of years later and became fast friends. But the reason I was mentioning this whole thing about Saul Bellow and the incandescent and under the skin thing and everything is that when Ralph Roberts gave Marilyn the first massage, he commented that when he laid hands on her, it wasn't static electricity. And I quote him in the book, so I'm not going to try to paraphrase him really too well, but he said it was like an experience he'd never had before, but he'd heard about it when he was studying Swedish massage. when he was learning the practice and got a license to be a masseur, an actual masseur. And he said he was told that sometimes that happens. There's something different about some people's skin. And a skilled therapist who works with their hands can detect that when they lay their hands on that person. And the minute he did that with Marilyn, he felt that, and he was taken aback by it. And I found that kind of interesting because it really was kind of a confirmation of what Saul Bellow, of course, he was making a statement more of in a metaphoric sense,
Mm-hmm.
but in a literal sense, it was something that Ralph Roberts experienced.
Well, you know, a number of photographers who took pictures of her said that through the years. And, you know, I do a lot of metaphysical stuff on this channel, and it comes as no surprise to me because I don't spend all day, but I have spent some time trying to figure out what is it about this woman that she's just larger than life, iconic, right? And I do believe some people have their energy field is just stronger, more significant, more elevated. We won't talk about
Tina Sinatra, when she met Marilyn, which was an anecdote I was saving for another time, but anyway, she met her at a party, said that Marilyn was wearing a babushka, apparently picked up from, Paula Strauss. Had no makeup on.
Fashion
icon.
Yet
not Tina Sinatra, I'm sorry, Nancy Sinatra,
yeah,
said Marilyn had an aura about
yeah.
her. And there's only two other people I've ever met that had that aura. One was Elvis. The other was my dad, Frank Sinatra, and then Marilyn. So this is sensed by other people, not just Ralph Roberts.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's another dimension to this too, and I know this is something you would be interested in, and I know you're familiar with it from reading the book. Ralph recounts that when he was giving Marilyn the first massage, his mind started to wander. He said he started out thinking, every man in America would envy me right now, because Marilyn had asked the lights be turned out. They do the massage by the
candles.
Yeah, Arthur had retired to the bedroom, and here he was all alone with this gorgeous woman, But after about 15 minutes, his mind wandered, and he started thinking about this book by Willa Cather that he had read.
Yeah.
And he kept thinking about it while he's massaging Marilyn, and all of it. And he didn't mention anything to her about it, never mentioned the name. Out of the blue, Marilyn came up with, by the way, Ralph, have you ever read Willa Cather? And it just stopped. Ralph.
Oh yeah, I remember. That struck me.
How did she know that? He said it was the first of hundreds of times when we thought we could read each other's mind. Now you can get to know somebody and kind of anticipate their language, but this was just out of the blue stuff. This is like an ESP thing.
No, I hear you completely. I have my own thoughts on it, but in a nutshell, if you're, and I'm going to use just common vernacular just to make it easy, if you're on the same vibe, if your energy is the same, you will connect, and that really is the mystery of ESP. There's no mystery to it at all, and I do believe that she was psychic. And we're going to talk about that at some point. There are moments in her life where I just went, oh my God, I know what's going on here. Yeah. His relationship to her, if I can use the term, was a karmic relationship. Yeah. He was a very significant person in her life. Somebody who wanted to be an actor and ended up doing little bit parts, but becoming a masseuse in order to just support himself and, positioning himself in the perfect place to be a featured person in her life. Really interesting to me.
I might point out, for the benefit of people who have read Ralph's book, which I feel like I kind of encouraged to be released, his nephew, Hap Roberts, had this manuscript and all kinds of papers for many years, showed it to various authors, Donald Spoto and others, and they never seemed to realize the significance of this first person account. When I came along, I was given a copy, and I said to these people, Hap and his associate, my gosh, why is this not in print? So I encouraged it. In fact, when it came out, they thanked me in the credits. I appreciated that. However, that book does not, as good as it is, and I encourage people to read it, does not include all of Ralph's writings that I have inserted into my book.
Why
So
was that? Did they not have access to them?
they chose, for whatever reason, not to put it in.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
Plus, I also had other sources. Ralph gave other interviews, printed and video interviews, so I had those to supplement.
Those to put together, yeah.
But there were things, for example, when Ralph was lamenting the books that had been written, and he wrote a very angry letter to Anthony Summers and accused him of printing exactly the opposite of what I told you. And that sort of thing. That didn't go in the Roberts book, which, was their judgment, editorial judgment. I felt it was significant, and I had the permission to do that. So I did that. But
no,
anyway.
I'm really struck by how comprehensive your book is. It's remarkable. And you have the receipts. You're not just making things up and making allegations.
I'm not guessing at it. Yeah, when in doubt, I leave it out. Basically, it's a lot of. But
that's kind of catchy.
Well, Marilyn, as she was progressing into like the whole 1960 period, she still had work to do, like promoting the release of that movie and so forth. But it was kind of an odd situation. 59, we're kind of breezing past it to some extent because she was very busy, but she wasn't really busy with a lot of films. So the official premiere of Some Like It Hot was at Lowe's Theater in New York in March of 1959, and she didn't like it. Now, this is going full circle. She herself said she thought she looked like a fat pig. So there you go. I don't mean to validate that wacko Spectator or Lloyd Shearer for saying that, but she most certainly did not.
Well, let's be real about this. You've been in a movie with somebody who loathes you.
Yes.
And doing a blonde role that you would just as soon not have to do, even if you like the script. And then you have an ectopic pregnancy. You're not going to have fond memories.
I think she was self-conscious and probably, I'm just guessing, felt, well, I'm pregnant. I probably gained weight, but it didn't show. I mean, she was gorgeous in that film. And remember what I said. They did not have to alter any of her costumes. Yeah. And in fact, it was days after she completed the film when she gets this inquiry from 20th Century Fox asking, "Are you pregnant?" By that point, she was pretty far along. So it was not even obvious to, the people that were putting up the money.
Well, she couldn't have been too far along.
Right.
And I don't dare discuss anything medical. I'm always in trouble with YouTube. But I think it's a common knowledge and safe to talk about that an ectopic pregnancy has the potential to kill you if that fertilized egg gets to a certain point, because you can rupture your fallopian tube and bleed to death. So she couldn't have been too far along, but that discounts all the hormone changes that occur.
Right,
and,
exactly.
Yeah, it's bad.
She kind of laid low for a while after that. She gave we haven't really mentioned Johnny Strasberg, but the Strasbergs,
the son,
had two children. Susan was the actress on the stage and very successful at a Broadway stage without any coaching from her parents. And
now, wasn't she Anne Frank? No, Helen Keller. What? No, that was Patty Duke. She was Anne Frank on stage.
Yes, and I misquoted in one of our earlier interviews.
Oh,
so I'm glad it was going to the Diary of Anne Frank. Now, if I've screwed that up again, I completely resign from this.
Oh, it's just hellish to be human, Larry. I just can't stand it.
Well, I'm actually in the middle. I've been doing interviews for a different book, unrelated to this book. Completely off the topic of Marilyn.
Is this the Reagan book?
And I have another one. No, it's a different book entirely. So, my mind is cluttered. I got to separate who's who. Anyway, bottom line was, Marilyn kind of felt sorry for John Strasberg, and she gave him her fourth Thunderbird. Yep. And he couldn't believe that because he was such a nondescript person in the life of his parents.
Yeah.
He was just kind of the forgotten one. And Marilyn, by the way, you can kind of sense that Arthur and Marilyn were having problems because she would spend some nights at the Strasberg's apartment. And she would oust John Strasberg from his own room and he'd have to go and sleep on the couch.
Yeah.
But there were times she was sleepless, so she'd wander out from the bedroom, and they'd sit on the couch half the night talking. So she got closer to Johnny Strasberg just from that.
Well, there's a saying, you know, there's an old saying, I hope I get this right. A child who is sort of ignored in a family is like treated like the redheaded stepchild.
Yeah.
I don't know why they say that, but that is what he was. He was ignored.
But she also, of course, very at the end of 59 and leading into 60, was getting ready to film that movie that I keep dodging because it's, you know, Let's Make Love. It wasn't a really great picture, but it finally, you know, they had cameos from Bing Crosby, Gene Kelly, Tony Randall was in it, Milton Berle was in it, but the part had really no substance for Marilyn. And Arthur Miller crossed a picket line. The Screenwriters Guild went on strike, and he went ahead. He was offered a role in helping to beef up the script, and Marilyn was even ticked off at him for having done that. And
this is the movie where he was toying with the script all the time.
Well, he also did that with the Misfits, though, too.
Oh, okay.
Because
well, see, he's an ongoing problem. She had a really broken picker.
Well, and so there were problems with that movie. Originally, Gregory Peck was going to star opposite Marilyn on the Let's Make Love movie. But then when he saw the script, it had been revised a bit. He saw that Marilyn's part had been beefed up. And Gregory Peck, who has always spoken of so highly as being such a great actor and true gentleman, walked. He didn't think his part was good enough. So they lost him. So keep that one in mind for.
Well, you don't get to be a star without a massive ego.
Yeah, everybody's got an ego, I think, to survive. But you know, in Marilyn's case, she didn't evince ego. You know, wasn't egotistical in that sense of being holier than thou. You know, aloof, nose in the air.
Well, I don't think she ever stabbed somebody in the back.
Right.
Yeah.
But obviously, she had an appreciation for her skill in front of the camera. She'd never be able to summon the energy and the courage to be able to be in front of the camera. But that movie also had a dance scene that included a big production number, My Heart Belongs to Daddy. And I'm not going to go into the whole premise of that film because it's kind of an odd, convoluted twist and turn script. But Jack Cole, with whom she'd worked before, was in doubt that she'd be able to handle the choreography, but he needn't have worried. He was so relieved how well she did. He sent her a telegram basically saying all is right with the world. He really handled that well.
Well, she took ongoing dancing lessons. You know, she took things seriously. Yes. You want to hear a little Hollywood gossip I heard?
Sure.
Okay. This is alleged. I just read this. Somebody said this somewhere. I don't know. I just read it. Barbra Streisand is all upset. Did you hear about that?
Well,
speaking of massive egos,
Barbra Streisand threatened me one time, so that's another.
Oh, maybe I shouldn't talk about her. I don't know. So she was in a movie with Robert De Niro. It was a comedy, and they're doing a sequel, and she's offended because they're not paying her enough. So because you can never have enough money, Larry. You know that, right?
Of course.
I'm tickled by these little moments of extreme narcissism. Just crack me up. Okay, so what would you like to talk about?
Well, I was going to mention Eve Von Tile.
Oh well, she took that title, "Let's Make Love," very seriously.
And Simone Signoret, is that how you pronounce it?
Signoret. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
And they occupied a bungalow at the Beverly Hills Hotel next to a bungalow occupied by Marilyn and Arthur. And they became fairly chummy. The problem was with this French-Italian actor, he barely spoke English, and his wife spoke it just a little bit better.
Well, I think he spoke body English. No.
Well, he had to have a lot of coaching, and there were stresses and strains about that. Then, of course, there was that writer's strike. There was some delay. There were some obligations where because Arthur Miller had a commitment to help on the following movie, The Misfits, he had to leave and go to Ireland to confer with John Huston, who was over there filming.
Oh, he was over there.
Completely different movie. And Simone had to leave for a professional obligation. So then you have Marilyn and Eve alone while they're filming this movie. And apparently a spark ignited. At least it made the gossip columns. Hedda Hopper was very nasty about it and told everybody that, or told Marilyn, addressed her comments to Marilyn, said, "You're being self destructive." It came to the fore to such an extent that even Simone was asked about this. Is, Marilyn Monroe in love with your husband?
And this is an incredible quote.
She
Go for
had
it.
quite, I hope I don't bungle this, but
Yeah.
she said, if Marilyn Monroe is in love with my husband, it just proves she has good taste because I am in love with him too.
I just can't believe it. It's hilarious.
Pretty endearing woman to be that,
cosmopolitan of her.
But this guy was, I hate to turn the conversation into a dark frame of mind here, but years later, Eve was accused by a stepdaughter.
Oh yeah,
I'll let
careful what words you use here. I get in trouble.
That's all I was going to say about it.
Yeah.
This guy,
I think everybody can add 2 + 2 and figure
absolutely.
out what those accusations were.
But, so it was not a terrific movie for Marilyn. There's one thing that did happen when she went to Hollywood to film it, and that is she made a mistake of a lifetime in this regard. She turned to Marianne Criss,
who
had not yet been incarcerated during a lockup ward.
Yeah.
She was still on good terms with Marianne Criss. She asked for a reference, somebody that Marianne would suggest she see as a psychiatrist in LA, now that she was going to be in LA for a while. It was no longer convenient to keep seeing Marianne Criss. And of course, who was suggested?
Oh man, a
Ralph
lunatic.
Greenson.
Yeah.
And Ralph Greenson, in turn, introduced her to Hyman Engelberg. And he told Marilyn, I think the two of you are going to get along okay because you're both narcissists.
And that ended up with the housekeeper that she had that was spying on her. And we'll get to that in another video. But there was just this sort of domino effect of users and predators in her life. It was horrible.
I can elaborate just a little bit more about that filming. June 1st, of course, is Marilyn's birthday, and she turned 34. There was a party thrown for her by Rupert Allen, who was her publicist. So, if you're paying your publicist, I guess he'll throw you a party or whatever. But Tennessee Williams and his mother Edwina were there. And Gary Cooper was planning on being there, but he was sick. So Marilyn sent him a big bouquet of roses. And he wrote a beautiful, touching letter to Marilyn for her thoughtfulness. But this is the kind of person Marilyn was. Yeah. She paid attention to the small things in life that made other people feel better.
Was it Betty Grable whose daughter got injured when they were making a movie? And Marilyn is the only one who bothered to call her and check in and see, is your daughter okay?
Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, there was the other people were Clifford Odets, Sammy Kahn was at that party. So Marilyn knew a lot of people across the board. Later in June, she flew back on the 25th to New York. And at that point, they were done filming that movie. And she actually left Hollywood ahead of Yves Montand. And Simone had already departed to fly overseas to work on her film anyway. But what Marilyn did here, now keep in mind, she was already in New York a few days ahead of Yves Montand. But she knew his flight schedule. She knew when he'd be coming into Idlewild Airport. So she decided to surprise him. And she went with Mae Reese, her secretary, and they hid behind a big pillar at the airport. And then as he's walking past with his secretary, whose last name I think also was May or Reese or something like that, out pops Marilyn. And she had caviar and champagne waiting in a limousine so the two of them could say a final goodbye. Unfortunately, there were people at the airport that saw this, and Montand's publicist was there also tried to suggest that they get together in a motel room where they could all go and be out of the public eye. And there's contradiction as to whether that ever occurred. But Earl Wilson reported anyway, and Earl was a good friend of Marilyn's and might have the skivvy on this, that the two sat in the back of her limo for 3 hours, the reason being that Montan's next flight was delayed, so there was even more time to kill. But anyway, Marilyn put what she described as a period at the end of that sentence with regard to her relationship with him. Now, I want people to write this down who think that Marilyn did away with herself. She didn't fall apart. She didn't go into a deep, dark depression. She didn't harbor ideas of holding a press conference and besmirching this actor's name. She didn't do herself in. She carried on with her life. Surprise, surprise.
Let me just interject here that she had what I would describe as a very modern, enlightened attitude towards adult relationships. She was capable of enjoying the moment, enjoying the person, and then when it no longer served both of them, and not in a manipulative, pragmatic way, but just when things cooled, she could walk away from it and continue with her life. She had a broken picker when it came to full-time permanent male like marriage type relationships. But at the same time, she was able to maintain friendships with people. And I mean, and Yves Montand, they parted ways on very friendly terms, both of them. You know, and that was a
and even his wife, Simone,
I know.
Spoke kindly of each other. There was a point at which, after Eve had returned, the international press was still picking up on this whole idea of a romance. And Marilyn finally did something that she rarely did. She made a public statement specifically addressing and shooting down this. And this is kind of unusual because she was, so discreet and everything. And she said, after my movies get done filming, and I'm paraphrasing, she said, some of my leading men have said critical things about me, but Eve is an exception. So does that mean I'm supposed to marry him?
I know, she was very independent. Now,
which I thought was a witty quote, But
I hate to do this, but I want to make sure we talk about the Misfits before time runs out. We've got about 15 minutes. So
now I'm not ready to do that. Only because I'm a little bit concerned that if we start that, there's some groundwork that we need to lay. Because Marilyn was very much victimized with the Misfits. John Huston was drunk a lot of the time, would fall asleep in the director's chair. He was gambling all night long. He lost money that was allocated by the studio to make the movie. It was
then blamed her.
And then staged, she called up her two doctors, those two winning doctors, and got them to, hospitalize her for a week so that he could fill some time. Anyway, we'd go into that. And I'm a little bit concerned about if we start down that path, it's going to just...
Well, I have a page and a half left out of 6 pages. So that probably would be going tight with but you've already covered some of it. The thing that struck me here in the making of this movie was the prevalence of substance use on the part of almost everybody in the movie.
You're talking incredible. About the Misfits?
And and just a variety of substances. And Huston, not only was he drinking and possibly doing pills, but he was also addicted to gambling. And that's another addiction, And Gable was on something.
Gable wasn't taking pills, but he was drinking.
Yeah.
Excessive tumblers of, whiskey.
Yeah.
And then we have her favorite co-star of the whole lot.
It was, she loved him. She used to kiss his picture goodnight when she was a kid. I thought
I'm not talking about Gable, though. I'm talking about the other male lead in the movie.
Maybe I didn't write down who it was. Who was it?
I'm going to get you for this, Helen, yet.
Oh, that's okay. I didn't like this movie either.
I mean, my mental focus hasn't been on that movie. The guy that was Elizabeth Taylor's just best friend
Oh,
in
and he
later
died
life.
young. Yeah, 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 yeah.
The
I know,
guy
I
that,
know
you
who.
know,
Yeah,
had the
I can
terrible
see his
car accident.
face. I
And
can see his face.
you can
Yeah.
look it up on your phone there for us. We'll be enlightened.
Oh, this is gonna drive me crazy. It's like on the tip
Anyway,
of my tongue.
he was really into the booze and the pills, and he was carrying a tumbler also, and they were heavily drinking. I'm not talking about Marilyn drinking. I'm talking about these men on set drinking.
During the yeah.
Yeah, during the filming.
Houston pass out in the director's chair?
Yes, and spend all night, at the gambling tables.
Who knew there was a band called the Misfits, and I have to plow through all that nonsense? Oh, come on! What year was it made? Montgomery Clift.
That would be it.
Okay. I could see his face.
I think people, I could see his face too.
Yeah, he died young. It's sad.
He did, in just a room by himself, basically.
He and Elizabeth Taylor were very.
They were. He was very much injured in a car accident after he left Liz's home one night,
and had plastic surgery.
Horrible.
Right?
And she rushed to the scene.
Yeah.
She really, really cared for him like a brother. But there's so much about that Misfits thing that I want to go into, and I think, with your permission, I think we should probably save that.
Okay, that's
very
fine.
Interesting things that surrounded that.
Gives me a head start on questions.
Like the time they had a few days off, there was actually a forest fire that interfered with power. They had no power to film with. They were in this hotel, and they were by candlelight, so you can't make a movie that way. But anyway, Marilyn got the idea to go to San Francisco, which she knew anyway because of, her marriage to Joe DiMaggio. So she and Ralph Roberts and Montgomery Clift and Paula Strasberg went to San Francisco. And I want to save that little experience for our next visit because that was fun. Some hilarious things happened during that.
Yeah.
And but the Misfits was very grueling, and of course ended tragically with the death of Gable. He had the heart attack, stricken a few days after filming.
Right after. In fact, he was all worked up, wasn't he? Because they wanted him to come back and reshoot the ending.
Right. We've covered a little bit of that in the past too.
Yeah. Well, that's okay. We're both forgetting things. It doesn't hurt to refresh.
Well, and I think that the Misfits thing, then it was followed by a period of inactivity in the sense of her not making a film. She had gallbladder surgery, laid her up for a while. It wasn't the kind of surgery they can do with very small incisions.
They didn't have that in those days. Yeah.
So her convalescence was prolonged for about a 3-month period.
Yeah.
Her half-sister Bernice Miracle came up from Florida for a while. She got reacquainted at the end of that 1 year with Joe DiMaggio after the relationship ended with Arthur Miller, and Joe DiMaggio gave her the bum's rush too. So those are little complexities I think we need. We could devote an entire segment just to 61, which I know we're not going to do.
But she had a number of different health issues. I mean, legitimate physical health issues. And it was funny. I was thinking about her surgery. My husband had a heart attack years ago, probably close to 20 years ago, and kind of young for a heart attack at the time. And that's a whole story. Someday I'll tell that story because it's unbelievable. But in the hospital, after they did an angiogram and they put in a stent, and he doesn't care if I talk about this, by the way, they said, okay, well, looks like you're good to go. This is a Saturday afternoon. He had the heart attack Friday night. Saturday afternoon, he's treated, $50,000 for one night in hospital. P.S. And then the doctor says, so you can go home. And he said, what about work? And he said, oh, the doctor said, you can go back to work on Monday. At which point I said, excuse me, in our family, when you have a heart attack, you get to take the week off. I couldn't believe it because I had worked in hospitals previously where, several decades earlier, where if you had a heart attack, you might end up being in the hospital for like 6 weeks, 8 weeks in CCU, in cardiac care, which is intensive. Right. Yeah.
Well, when not to get ahead of ourselves, but when Marilyn had the gallbladder surgery and was released from the hospital, it was a mob scene, and they pressed her. They had security around her. Ralph Roberts was there. They pressed on her so hard it hurt the incision.
Yeah.
It opened up, and you can see blood
Opened up her incision. Yeah.
of her dress.
And I couldn't believe, I read it. I went back and I looked at the picture. You would never know it from looking at her face.
When they got in the car, the doctor accompanied her in the car. He said, "Oh, where's my stethoscope?" Somebody had stolen his stethoscope. It is unbelievable.
People are crazy. Yeah. Well, let's save that as a preview for next time, and I hope there'll be a next time. I hope you'll be willing to come back. This is so much fun, and I have to tell you, I don't know if I've passed on to you the compliments about your book, about your storytelling, about how fascinating it is to hear about this story. People were astounded, and I've had people say, well, Marilyn Monroe, you know, and I've been having a good time setting them straight. So thanks to you. Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of books out there, and people need to realize that there's a lot of repetition. Sad to say, there are hack authors who are only doing books on Marilyn to exploit her name and so forth. And they repeat, they keep regurgitating these same myths and lies. And I accepted nothing at face value. So I don't think most people realize, and just, you know, this is not meant to be a commercial per se, but this is a huge book. How do you think I filled this book?
Look at,
I mean, I didn't read it with, you know, a lot of those books are a lot smaller. If you want a fast read that's filled with things that are just the same old myths, buy those. Don't buy my book. But
it's not dry. It's not tedious. It's not.
It isn't, and it's so filled with new. This is what I was getting to say.
God.
It's so filled with new information that's never appeared anywhere else. That's not hyperbole. That's not hype.
No, and it's
literally is true.
Yeah.
And a lot of it, as I explained in the very first chat, I've had the benefit of declassified documents. By the way, some of those declassified documents even took place in March of this year, after my book came out. So there could be a sequel. You never know.
Oh, that'd be great. Well, I'll say something I say on my channel all the time. When I look things up, pieces of news, I often find that there'll be an initial news report, and then every other news source just copies it verbatim. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it's the same with biographies. People go to previous biographies for their information, and you don't know how accurate or inaccurate those may be.
It's shameful, and some of these authors are still alive. They're still capitalizing on it. I heard that there's going to be some multi-part documentary that's going to air on cable, and the authors they're tapping are just brazen, blatant liars. I'm sorry to say that. They know some of this stuff is not true, and they repeat it anyway.
Well, we won't name names, but I don't think that's unusual. I really don't think that it's remarkable in the sense that it's a terrible thing, but it's not uncommon. I think that happens a lot.
A big corporation that owns a giant television network everybody knows and owns a book publishing company keeps putting these things out, and they don't care.
No, oh God, no. It's about the money.
Can I trust their news when they're willing to go out and promote books and, you know, fraudster authors?
I think we've all had a personal lesson in using discretion in the news we consume. I like to think people who are not addicted to the screen, who are making an effort to be informed from multiple sources, have had a real lesson in the past 10 years, how easy it is to manipulate people. I hate to do this, but I have to and I have to say goodbye and thank you, and then I don't run away because I want, you know, the time flew for me. I think this is so fascinating, and I read the book. So
I wrote the book, and I got to refresh my memory sometimes.
And there's so much, and people actually have told me that they watched our last video and they bought the book. So that's nice. And I appreciate that. And I know Larry appreciates
I
it.
do too.
Yes. And so thank you, everybody who's watching. And I hope you really enjoyed this. Come back for the next episode. We don't know for sure when, but there's a whole lot more to talk about. And some of it
Well,
is
let me just tease this. I know this is with your acquiescence, or maybe that's not the right word, but your enthusiasm. And that is, the anniversary of Marilyn's passing is coming up August 4th. And I
Yes.
hope between now and then we'll be able to do something.
I hope so too. I would like to get that out there around
That
that time.
story is so screwed up and so distorted. And I have the facts, contemporaneous documentation. And when you see how these things line up, all these pieces fit together, you're going to be convinced that she met with foul play. There's no doubt about it.
And it's going to be interesting to see how we navigate these very dangerous waters. But I think we can do it. I have faith that we can.
I think so
we'll
too.
talk about it ahead of time and we'll make a plan. So thank you very much, Larry. This has been really fun. I so appreciate it. It's so nice to talk about something other than current events. And great book. Everybody go out and buy it. And we will be back with the rest of the story here in the next couple of months. And in the meantime, thank you, Slungafoil. Slancha.
Thank you.